I told her. He's coming.
Then keep your eyes down.
The chief has noticed you. You should come tonight.
It's better that way.
My child, be careful how you respond. In this village, people don't turn him down. It can bring trouble you don't expect.
The chief is waiting.
Tell him, I am not interested.
No woman was allowed to refuse him until she did. Everyone in the village knew the rule, even if nobody had ever written it down. You learnt it the way you learnt everything important in Agenli, not from a book, not from a direct conversation, but from watching, from the way a woman's eyes shifted when a certain name was mentioned. From the way a mother's hand would tighten on her daughter's arm in the market, from the silence that landed like a stone whenever Chief Balogun Adewale walked through the compound gates. Agenli was a small town, the kind where everyone's business lived in someone else's mouth. 3,000 people, one market, 2 churches, a mosque, and enough history to fill a river. The red soil roads ran between zinc-roofed houses and mango trees that had been old since before anyone's grandmother was born. It was a beautiful place, peaceful, people said, orderly. That was the word they used, orderly. And orderly in Agenli meant that certain things simply did not happen. Women did not walk alone past the chief's compound after dark. Daughters of good families dressed modestly when there was a community gathering. And when Chief Balogun Adewale expressed interest in a woman, whether it was a casual remark or a formal visit from one of his messengers, the answer was always the same: yes. Not because every woman wanted to say yes. That was the part nobody spoke about. Some men are simply not refused. Old Mama Iyabo had once said to her granddaughter, adjusting the girl's wrapper with calm, practiced hands. She hadn't explained further. She hadn't needed to. The girl was 14. She was already learning. The rule had no ceremony, no announcement. It had simply always been there, like the harmattan wind, invisible, until you walked into it, and by then you already understood. Nobody had ever refused him. Not once. Not in 30 years. My mommy said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers in 30 days. Please help me prove her wrong by clicking subscribe right now. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Ngozi arrived in Agenli on a Tuesday in the back of her husband Emeka's borrowed pickup truck with 2 bags, a box of kitchen things, and the kind of open face that had not yet learned to close itself. She was from Enugu, a city woman, people said, with a slight weariness that came from knowing city women asked too many questions. She was 28, quiet but observant, with the habit of watching a room before she walked fully into it. Emeka had grown up in Agenli before leaving for work in Lagos. Now the company had transferred him back, and here they were. Home, he called it. Ngozi called it new. The women of the compound welcomed her with food and advice, and the particular warmth of people who wanted to like you before they decided whether to trust you. Agenli is a good place, said Adunola, her neighbor, arranging fried plantain on a plate. Peaceful. Just learn how things work here, and you will have no problem. What things? Ngozi asked. Adunola smiled. All the things, she said, and handed her the plate. The first time Ngozi heard the name Balogun Adewale, she was at the borehole on her 4th morning. 3 women were filling jerry cans, speaking in Yoruba mixed with English, their voices low and comfortable. When the chief's black SUV rolled slowly past on the road behind them, the conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every woman turned slightly away from the road. The SUV passed. The dust settled. Then, quietly, the conversation resumed, but it had moved to something else entirely. Ngozi looked at the women. None of them met her eyes. That evening, she mentioned it to Emeka. "Who is Chief Balogun Adewale?" Emeka was eating, not looking up. "The traditional ruler. Very influential man. He has land, connections. Even some government people are afraid of him." He paused. "Why?" The women at the borehole when his car passed, they all went quiet. "That is just respect," Emeka said. "It didn't look like respect," Ngozi said. Emeka looked at her then, briefly. Something moved across his face, not quite warning, not quite dismissal. He put down his spoon. "Ngozi, we just got here. Learn the community first before you start analyzing." She nodded, but her eyes stayed open. Over the next 2 weeks, she noticed more. She noticed that when the chief's name came up in conversation, women who had been laughing would grow careful. She noticed that Mama Iyabo's daughter, Sade, a pretty girl of 22, had stopped attending the Sunday market after someone said the chief had noticed her. She noticed that two of the older women in the compound, women who had lived in Agenli all their lives, never talked about him at all, as if he did not exist. She noticed the mothers pulling their daughters close. She filed all of it in the quiet part of her mind and kept watching. It was Blessing who gave her the first real fragment. Blessing was 34, sharp-tongued, and had a laugh that could start a room. She sold fabric in the market on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and she had decided, without consulting anyone, that she and Ngozi were going to be friends. They were sitting outside Blessing's shop one afternoon, drinking zobo and complaining about the heat, when a young woman walked past on the other side of the road. She was walking fast, head down. "That is Comfort," Blessing said, her voice suddenly flat. "What happened to her?" Blessing sipped her drink. "She was unlucky." "In what way?" A long pause. Blessing looked at her sideways. "You have noticed things." It was not a question. Ngozi said nothing. Comfort was engaged. Blessing said finally, "Beautiful girl, good family. Then last year, the chief sent for her." She stopped. "Her father said yes," before she could say anything. "And she went?" "She went." Blessing looked at the street. 3 weeks later, the engagement was off. The young man's family said they no longer wanted her. Nobody said why out loud, but everyone understood. That the chief— "We don't say it like that." Blessing cut in, her voice suddenly careful. "We say she was unlucky. We say circumstances changed. We say God has a plan." She turned to Ngozi with something that looked like exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you understand?" "I understand that it is easier to cooperate," Ngozi said quietly. Blessing looked at her for a long moment. "It is easier," she agreed, "for everyone." At the next women's meeting at the church, a monthly gathering for community welfare, Ngozi listened more than she spoke. The conversation moved through the usual things: a family that needed support, a young man who had taken ill, plans for the harvest festival, normal things. But near the end, someone mentioned that the chief had attended a naming ceremony in Odo village and had commented on how beautiful the family's eldest daughter was. A brief silence. Then Mama Iyabo, who was 67 and had been sitting in the corner with her eyes half closed, said simply, "God will protect her." Several women nodded. Nobody said anything else. Later, walking home with Adunola, Ngozi said, "Why doesn't anyone report him to the police?" Or Adunola stopped walking. She turned to Ngozi slowly, as if she had just said something in a foreign language, not offensive, just deeply, fundamentally foreign. "The last one who resisted," Adunola said, her voice very low. "Her husband lost his job. Government contract gone in 1 week. The family had to leave Agenli. She started walking again. Nobody said it was connected. Nobody had to. And before her?" Adunola was quiet for a moment. "A woman from the Adekule family. She complained to the church deacon. The deacon went to the elders. The elders went to the chief." She paused. "The elders came back and told the woman she must have misunderstood the situation." The elders. "Agenli is built on the elders, Ngozi. Some battles," she said, "do not belong to women." Ngozi walked the rest of the way home in silence. She started to understand the architecture of it. Chief Balogun Adewale was not just a traditional ruler. He was the kind of man whose fingerprints were on everything in Agenli without anyone being able to prove it. He had built the borehole. He had funded the secondary school extension. 3 of the 5 town council members owed their positions to his recommendation. The local government chairman had attended his last birthday celebration. And he understood, with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting it, exactly how much silence cost. It did not cost much. A piece of land here, a job there, a quiet word to the right person that a certain family was reliable or problematic. He did not need to threaten anyone with violence. The architecture did not require it. The architecture simply made cooperation more comfortable than resistance, and made resistance more expensive than most families could afford. Ngozi went looking for information. In the only library Agenli had the memory of its oldest residents. She found it in pieces, the way you find a broken pot in the soil. There was the story of a woman who had been promised a scholarship for her son and received it after she visited the chief's residence. There was the story of a widow whose land had been disputed and whose case had been quietly resolved after she stopped refusing the chief's attention. There was the story of a young teacher transferred to a school 3 hours away after her father, a civil servant, rejected the chief's messenger on her behalf. And there were the women who had simply disappeared from the story. Not physically, they were still in Agenli, they still went to market, still carried water, still raised their children, but they had become very quiet, as if something had been removed from inside them without surgery. Then, something happened that Ngozi had not expected. She saw him alone. It was early morning. She had gone to the compound edge to hang washing when she heard voices from the narrow path behind the fence. One voice was the chief's. She recognized its measured, authoritative tone, but the other voice was a young man's, and it was shaking. She did not move. "I don't understand, sir," the young man was saying. "I followed every instruction." "I know you did." The chief's voice was flat, not angry, something flatter than anger. "Kolade, sit down." A pause. "I am not a bad man," the chief said. The young man said nothing. "I have built things for this community that will outlast me. The school, the water, the road to Odo before me. People walked in mud for 6 months every year." A silence. "I have given my life to this place." "Yes, sir." "Then why?" A long pause, longer than Ngozi expected. Why does it feel, sometimes, like none of it counts? Like the things I have taken are the only things that will be remembered? The young man had no answer, neither did Ngozi. She stood very still against the fence, a wet wrapper in her hands, and listened to the silence of a man who seemed for the first time to be hearing himself. Then the chief cleared his throat. His voice returned to its usual register, composed, commanding, "Get the car ready. I have a meeting at 10. Footsteps. Gone." Ngozi stood there for a long time after they left. She did not feel sorry for him. She was clear about that. But the moment had given her something she hadn't had before. Not forgiveness, not understanding exactly, but the specific, unsettling knowledge that the man at the center of 30 years of damage had never once, until perhaps just now, been forced to hear what his life actually looked like from the outside. That was not innocence. It was a different kind of failure. And it made what he had done not smaller, but somehow more complete, because it showed that the system had protected him so thoroughly for so long that it had also protected him from himself. She went inside and finished her breakfast in silence. It was the harvest festival that changed everything. The festival was Agenli's biggest celebration. 3 days of food, music, dancing, and the particular joy that comes from a community that still knows how to come together. Tents were set up in the central square. The chief sat at the head of the gathering, as he always did, flanked by the elders, dressed in asoke that caught the light like copper. Ngozi was there with Emeka, sitting with Blessing and her husband near the middle of the crowd. Children ran between legs. Drums spoke to each other across the square. For a moment, it was simply beautiful. Then she saw Nena. Nena Okonkwo was 25, from one of the few Igbo families in Agenli. Her father was a mechanic. She was not wealthy, not connected, not protected by any of the things that might have made the chief cautious. She was simply a young woman with a wide smile and braided hair who had come to the festival with her younger sister. What happened first was this. Kole, the chief's messenger, the young man from the path, approached Nena with the particular posture of someone delivering news that was actually an instruction. He leaned close to her ear. He spoke briefly. The music was too loud for Ngozi to hear what was said, but she saw Nena's face change. It was a small change, the way a sky changes just before rain. Something behind her eyes settled, like a decision being made. Then Nena said, clearly and without lowering her voice, "Tell him I am not interested." Kolade blinked. He leaned close again, as if she had not understood. Nena stepped back. "I heard you the first time," she said. "I said no." The people nearest to them heard, and because sound travels in predictable ways in a crowd, the no moved outward like a ripple. The drumming did not stop, but something in the atmosphere shifted the way air shifts before a storm, when all the birds go quiet at once. Kolade straightened. He looked around, as if hoping someone would appear to help him. Nobody did. He walked back toward the chief. Nena stood exactly where she was. Chief Balogun Adewale did not stand. He did not shout. He simply looked across the crowd toward where Nena stood, with the calm, patient expression of a man who had never needed to hurry. Then Nena turned and looked back at him. She did not look away. 30 seconds. Perhaps less. But everyone who saw it felt those 30 seconds like an hour. Then Nena turned back to her sister, put her arm around the girl's shoulders, and said something that made her sister laugh. A small, nervous sound, and they walked together toward the food stalls as if the world had not just shifted on its axis. The silence that followed was so complete that for a moment, even the children were still. She just. Blessing breathed beside Ngozi. Yes, Ngozi said. Blessing grabbed her arm hard. She does not know what she has done. But Ngozi, watching the crowd, the fear, yes, the disbelief, yes, but also something else, something small and bright, the way a coal glows before it becomes fire, said softly, maybe she does. The chief recovered his composure in seconds. He leaned toward the elder on his left and said something. The elder nodded. The festival resumed. The drums picked up again. But the 30 seconds could not be undone because 50 people had seen it. And in Agenli, 50 people was enough. It took 4 days. The first crack appeared at the borehole when a woman named Patience, who was 41 and had lived in Agenli all her life, said quietly, "She did what I always wished someone would do." She said it to 2 women she had known for 15 years. Then she walked home, but the 2 women told others. By the second day, Nena's name was in every conversation. The chief's supporters said she was disrespectful, that she had shamed a great man publicly. But among the women, quietly, in kitchens and at compound gates, something else was moving. Ngozi went to see Nena on the second day, bringing tomatoes as an excuse. Nena opened the door with the careful expression of someone expecting bad news. When she saw Ngozi, something relaxed slightly in her face. "Are you frightened?" Ngozi asked, once they were inside. "Yes," Nena said, "but I was frightened before too. Every woman here is frightened. We are just frightened of different things at different times." "Why did you say no?" Nena looked at her hands. "My mother. She was one of the women She stopped. 10 years ago, she never told my father. She told me last year. I watched what he did to her. What it has kept doing to her." She looked up. "I decided then that if it ever came to me, I would not be quiet, no matter what." Ngozi said nothing for a moment. "You might have started something. Or I might have ended everything," Nena said. But there was something in her voice, not quite calm, not quite certainty, but something that lived between the two. The stories surfaced slowly, not all at once, not loudly. The provision store woman told Blessing about a messenger who came 7 years ago. Comfort sat in Adunola's kitchen for 2 hours and said, "Enough. Mrs. Adebayo, the retired school teacher, told her daughter about a complaint filed in 1998 that 3 different men had told her in 3 different ways did not exist." By the 4th day, Ngozi understood the full shape of what the silence had been protecting, not just one man's behavior, but its length, its reach, its depth, the number of women, the number of years. The stories reduced to fragments, buried in euphemisms, or simply never told. She also began to understand the community's role with a clarity that made her chest tight. It was not that people did not know, they knew. And the community's silence had not been ignorance. It had been a choice, made over and over again by many people, each of whom had a reason that made sense to them individually. It was on the evening of the 4th day that Emeka came home and found her at the table with papers spread before her, notes, names, dates, the school teacher's daughter's phone number circled twice. He stood in the doorway for a long time. "What is this?" he said. "A formal complaint. 11 women, the Human Rights Commission, the State Ministry, and 2 journalists in Lagos. She looked up. I need you to understand what I'm doing. He stepped into the room. He picked up one page and read it slowly. Then he set it down. Ngozi. His voice was careful. My job, I know. My family is from here, my father's land. I know, Emeka. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. They looked at each other across the papers. She did not ask him to choose. She did not have to. He could see clearly what was on the table, not just the papers, but everything they represented. The women whose names were written there. The years those names had been silent. His wife's face, which had been watching this community since the day they arrived, with eyes that had never learned to look away. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and picked up a pen. Where do I sign? He said. Ngozi looked at him. I'm a witness, he said quietly. Blessing's husband told me things 6 months ago that I told myself weren't my business. He set the pen down on the paper. They were my business. I just chose not to make them mine. He paused. I won't do that again. She reached across and held his hand. Neither of them said anything more. Outside, Agenli was settling into its evening sounds, children being called home, a radio from a neighboring compound, the last of the day, birds going quiet. Later that night, sitting on the porch with Blessing, Ngozi told her what Emeka had done. Blessing was silent for a moment. Then she said, in a voice so low it was almost private, I was 18. Before I married, I never told anyone. She paused. I used to think it was because there was nothing to tell, but I think I just never believed anyone would listen. Ngozi held her hand until the sky went dark. The formal complaint was filed 6 weeks later. It carried 11 names and 1 witness statement. It went to the State Ministry, responsible for traditional rural affairs, to the Human Rights Commission, and because the school teacher's daughter knew what she was doing, to 2 journalists in Lagos who understood the difference between a story about a community and a story about a system. Chief Balogun Adewale did not fall the way powerful men fall in films loudly, dramatically, all at once. He fell the way such men usually fall in real life, slowly, with his lawyer speaking for him, and then with his silence becoming louder than anything his lawyer said. The state government suspended his traditional functions pending investigation. The local government chairman released a statement supporting due process. 2 council members quietly requested the associations with the chief's office not be highlighted in media coverage. In Agenli, the response was complicated. The way the response to truth always is when it arrives late. Some people were angry at the women. There were voices, mostly male, mostly older, that said this was a disgrace, that this was outsider influence, that Nena Okonkwo should have known her place. There were families who stopped speaking to families. There was a Sunday sermon about respecting established authority that half the congregation walked out of. But there was also something that had never been in Agenli before. Mama Iyabo stood up at the next women's church meeting, 67 years old, the woman who had once told her granddaughter that some men are simply not refused, and said, in a voice that shook only slightly, I knew, we all knew, and we told the young women it was survival, and maybe it was, but survival should not have been the only choice we had to offer them. The room was silent. Then one woman began to cry. Then another. Not the collapsing kind of crying, the releasing kind, the sound of something that has been held too long, being finally, carefully set down. Sade came home for the first time in 7 months. She and her mother sat together without speaking about everything, because maybe they never would. But they were in the same room, and that was more than they had managed in years. Comfort walked to the market with her head up. Nena stayed in Agenli. She had decided she would not be the one to leave. Her father came to her room one evening, the man who had not spoken to her for 3 weeks after the festival, out of fear, out of the complicated love of someone who did not know how to protect what he was afraid of, and said, "I was wrong to be afraid for you instead of standing with you." It was not a long speech. It did not need to be. As for Kolade, the young messenger, the young man from the part behind the fence, he gave a statement to the investigators, a full one. He had been 17 when the chief first employed him. He had delivered messages he did not fully understand, then messages he understood too well, and had told himself each time that he was just the messenger. Giving the statement, he said later, was the first time in years that he had felt clean. Ngozi stood at the borehole on a quiet morning, the same borehole where she had first seen women turn away from a passing car, and watched the red roads and the mango trees and the ordinary life of a place trying painfully and honestly to reckon with itself. Emeka came and stood beside her. "Do you still think it was a good idea?" he asked. "Coming here." She thought about it. About Blessing's hand in hers in the dark. About the crack in Nena's voice when she talked about her mother. About 50 people seeing 30 seconds and not being able to unsee them. About a man sitting behind a fence, asking a young boy why it felt like nothing he'd built would outlast what he'd taken. About her husband reaching across a table and asking where to sign. "I think this place needed someone who hadn't learnt what not to see," she said. "Are you at peace?" "Not yet," she said, "but I think peace is the direction we're heading." A child ran past, chasing a dog, shouting something too fast to catch. An old man on a bicycle nodded at them. The borehole hummed. The sun rose over Agenli the same way it always had, quietly, without asking permission. But the women who walked to the water that morning walked differently, not with safety. Safety was still something that had to be built carefully, one policy and one conversation and one brave act at a time. Not with certainty, because certainty was a lie that had kept them still for so long, but with something older than safety and more stubborn than certainty, with the knowledge that silence is a choice, and that choosing to speak even once, even imperfectly, even with a shaking voice in a crowded festival square rewrites the calculation for every woman who comes after. Nena had not saved anyone by herself. The system was still imperfect, the community still wounded, the work still long, but she had done the one thing the system had never survived before. She had refused. And the world had not ended. And that small, enormous fact was now part of Agenli's memory, carried in the water, written in the red soil, passed from woman to woman, quietly, the way all the most important things in Agenli had always been passed, without anyone writing it down. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And tell me, have you ever discovered something about someone you loved that changed how you understood every year before it? See you in the next one.